Historically, the Korean Peninsula has been both a buffer, a cultural conduit, and an area of competition between China and Japan. Korea is the home to a major ethnic group that has played a significant role in the history of both countries, both Japan and China, a history that, and quite to this day, is very contested in both China and Japan. North Korea has evolved from being a close ally of China to being seen increasingly in Beijing as something very closely resembling a rogue state. The Chinese don't use that term, of course, about North Korea, but I think that they do increasingly candidly, although usually privately, express their concerns about North Korea's domestic political and economic system, about its programs to build weapons of mass destruction, its programs to build ballistic missiles, and they are concerned as to whether North Korea's irresponsible behavior might get China into difficulty. Perhaps one of the most important changes in Chinese policy towards the Korean Peninsula over the last several decades has been the change in China's attitude towards North Korea's nuclear program, which has gone from highly supportive to what I call derivatively negative or critical to highly negative today. But I think the key element here, the key trend is very clear, that China has become increasingly concerned about a nuclear weapons program in North Korean hands and therefore has found common cause with the United States, with South Korea, with Japan, and with Russia to try to denuclearize the peninsula. However, China has generally been far more skeptical about sanctions towards North Korea than the United States has been. The second difference is that Beijing has entirely opposed the goal of regime change in North Korea. First of all, if North Korea were to collapse or to suffer a serious economic dislocation, the Chinese are very clearly worried about the flood of refugees from Korea into northeast China. In addition, the other more important security concern that leads China to want to maintain a separate North Korea it would be a concern, an uncertainty about the strategic future of the Korean Peninsula. What happens to that piece of territory if North Korea is to vanish or to implode as a separate nation state? The other implication for Chinese policy is the question of Beijing's clear desire to promote reform, both economic and to some degree political, in North Korea. We know that the Chinese have been concerned, as I've indicated before, that the rigid neo-Stalinist character of the North Korean regime contributes not only to irresponsible behavior abroad, but also to instability potentially at home. A superficial stability on top of considerable weakness. In general, I think the Chinese are trying to apply the Chinese model of development to North Korea. Perhaps the most important element of the Chinese model, and one that the Chinese emphasize increasingly as they talk about it, is to take advantage in a controlled way of the process of globalization. Could North Korea do the same thing? Could it take advantage of globalization in the same way that that China did? And the answer is not entirely. There are some differences. Any economy can take advantage of globalization. Certainly North Korea would benefit from the opportunity to bring in capital and technology from abroad to expand its market by producing for export. But the difference is, and it can also obviously take advantage of the existence of a ethnic Korean economy right across the DMZ in South Korea, which also would have an interest in taking advantage of cheaper labor and assembly and manufacturing processes in North Korea. But the differences are also important. And at this point, we see much more modest reforms in agriculture and in special economic zones moving much more slowly and in much more limited ways than the Chinese did at a comparable stage of development. The key issue is whether the economic progress that appears to be following on in the wake of the North-South Summit a month or so ago is going to reflect a somewhat bolder attitude on the part of the North Koreans. But so far, the North Koreans seem to be cautious about even accepting the watered-down version of the Chinese model. So what the Chinese are doing is trying to build closer economic relations with both South and North as a kind of a part of their general omnidirectional policy towards the world in general. My sense is that Beijing's views would probably, on the structure, not be that much different from the views of the United States. We might quibble about who is involved at what stage, but I think that everyone would agree that the Chinese need to be involved at some point in this process of going from an armistice to a peace treaty to a peace architecture. So, to sum up, the Chinese have basically three goals as I see it. The denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, the maintenance of stability, in other words, the survival of the North Korean regime, and a concern that the North Korean regime not implode in ways that would disrupt the balance of power on the Korean Peninsula. As I've also said, this brings the Chinese position far closer towards the American position, and I think the South Korean position, than has been the case in the past. That's a good sign. But we also see areas in which, in the details, there may be some differences of opinion, already are or could be in the future.